I never thought my own family would betray me like this. I'd always known my parents favored my younger sister, Lauren, but I never expected them to go this far. A few months ago, I received a call from my bank regarding a loan application for $200,000. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't applied for a loan. Panic set in as I listened to the representative confirm my name, my details, and my supposed cosigner agreement. It had to be a mistake, or worse, fraud. I immediately requested a copy of the loan documents. As soon as I saw them, my stomach dropped. My signature was on the papers, except it wasn't mine. It was forged. The pieces clicked together almost instantly. There were only two people who could have done this: my parents. I drove to their house, barely able to keep my hands steady on the wheel. I hoped foolishly that there was some other explanation. Maybe someone had stolen my identity. Maybe it wasn't them. But the second I saw my mother's face when she opened the door, I knew. She looked guilty. "Come inside," she said, avoiding my gaze. I walked in, gripping the loan papers so tightly they crumpled at the edges. My father was already sitting in the living room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I didn't even sit down. I threw the documents on the coffee table. "Explain." My mother let out a breath. "Listen, we didn't have a choice." I cut her off. "You stole my identity. You forged my signature. You took out a $200,000 loan in my name. What part of that is not a choice?" My father, ever the calm one, finally spoke. "It's not what you think. We did it for Lauren. It's for her future." I let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, of course. Because Lauren always gets whatever she wants, doesn't she?" "She's getting married," my mother said, as if that justified everything. "We wanted to give her something special, a home, a place to start her life with Ryan." Lauren's fiancé, Ryan, was a decent guy from what little I knew of him. But that didn't matter right now. "You took out a loan in my name, for Lauren's house?" My voice was rising. "You didn't even ask me. You didn't even tell me." My father exhaled through his nose. "You have good credit. We knew you wouldn't say yes, so you stole from me." I finished for him. "You forged my signature. Do you have any idea what you've done? What if you miss a payment? This isn't some minor debt. This is 200 grand. My mother had the audacity to look hurt. "We were always going to pay it off. We just needed some time." I shook my head. "You don't just borrow $200,000 in someone's name without telling them." My father's patience was clearly running thin. "You're her brother. It's your responsibility to help." That's when I lost it. "No. My responsibility is to protect my financial future. You have no right to expect me to foot the bill for Lauren's life. She and Ryan both have jobs. Why couldn't they get their own mortgage?" My mother started wringing her hands. "We didn't want to burden them with debt so early in their marriage." I stared at her in disbelief. "And you thought I should take on that burden instead?" They didn't even look guilty, just annoyed, as if I was being unreasonable. "You've always been so independent," my father said. "You have a stable job. You don't have kids to take care of. So that makes me your personal bank?" I snapped. "You thought, oh, he can afford it. Let's just commit fraud and make him pay for Lauren's house." At that moment, Lauren walked in. Her expression was neutral, almost indifferent. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. "They told me about the loan," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me you didn't know." Lauren blinked. "Well," my stomach clenched. "You knew." She didn't deny it. Mom and Dad said it wasn't a big deal, that it would get sorted out. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "You let them do this?" She had the gall to look annoyed. "They were just trying to help. Why are you making such a scene?" I laughed bitterly. "A scene? You realize this could ruin my credit, my finances? This could screw up everything I've worked for." She rolled her eyes. "You're always so dramatic." I turned back to my parents. "I hope you understand that I'm not letting this go. I'm reporting this. To the bank? To the police if I have to." My mother gasped. "You wouldn't." My father's face darkened. "You'd put your own parents through that? You did this to yourselves." I didn't give them time to respond. I turned on my heel and walked out. The second I got home, I contacted the bank and told them everything. They promised to investigate immediately. Then I called a lawyer. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was criminal, and they were going to pay for it. Lauren's wedding gift had just become the biggest mistake of their lives. The days that followed were nothing short of chaos. My phone didn't stop ringing. My parents called me over and over, leaving voicemails filled with accusations, guilt-tripping, and desperate pleas for me to fix the mess I had made. I ignored most of them, but the sheer volume of their attempts to reach me was exhausting. Then, Sophie showed up at my apartment. I had barely taken a step toward the door before she started pounding on it like she was trying to break it down. I opened it, bracing myself for what was coming. Her eyes were swollen, her face red from either crying or rage, or both. The moment I stepped aside, she stormed in without an invitation. "You ruined my life," she shouted, her voice shaking. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall. "No, Sophie. You and our parents did that all on your own." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh, pacing in front of me like a caged animal. "How could you do this to me? To Mom and Dad? This was supposed to be my dream wedding, my future. And now Adam, he's reconsidering everything." "Good," I said coldly. "Maybe he should. If you and our parents thought committing fraud in my name was acceptable, what else are you willing to lie about?" She stopped pacing, her hands clenched at her sides. "I didn't ask for this. I had no idea they took out that loan." I tilted my head, studying her. "Did you really not know, Sophie? Or did you just not care?" Silence. That was all the answer I needed. Her lip quivered, but she forced herself to look defiant. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. They just wanted to help me. They knew you weren't using your credit for anything right now. So what's the big deal?" I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "What's the big deal? You really don't get it, do you? They committed fraud, Sophie. They stole my identity, forged my signature, and put me on the hook for a $200,000 loan. That's not helping you. That's ruining my life." "You're being so dramatic," she snapped. "If they had just made the payments on time, you never would have even noticed." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "So your grand plan was to hope they never missed a payment? Did you forget they're terrible with money? That's why they had to take the loan out in the first place." She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. "Well, it doesn't matter now, does it? You've made sure of that. Adam's family is furious. They think I had something to do with it, and now he's talking about postponing the wedding." I shrugged. "Again, good." Her face contorted with frustration. "How can you be so heartless? I'm your sister." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Yeah. And where was that sisterly bond when I was struggling to pay my own bills? When I was working 2 jobs to make ends meet? Did Mom and Dad ever offer to buy me an apartment? No. But suddenly, when it's you, it's my responsibility to fund your life?" She looked away, jaw tight. "It's not my fault they treated us differently." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but you benefited from it, and you never once questioned it. So excuse me if I don't feel sorry for you now." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "This isn't fair," I scoffed. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? You were about to get a $200,000 luxury apartment gifted to you, paid for with my name, without me even knowing. And you have the nerve to stand here and say I ruined your life?" Her fists clenched at her sides. "You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone. You could have talked to me first instead of going straight to Adam and his family." "And would that have changed anything?" I shot back. "Would you have given the money back? Would you have told Mom and Dad they were wrong? Or would you have done exactly what you're doing now, making excuses, defending them, and trying to guilt-trip me?" She had no response to that. I sighed, shaking my head. "Look, Sophie, I don't care if you hate me for this. I don't care if Mom and Dad never speak to me again. I'm not going to let them walk all over me just because they think family means unlimited forgiveness." She let out a shaky breath, pressing her fingers against her temples. "So what happens now?" I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "The bank is investigating the fraud. I've already spoken to my lawyer. And Mom and Dad? They're going to face the consequences of what they did." Her eyes widened. "You're suing them?" "Damn right I am." Her mouth fell open slightly, as if she couldn't believe I would take things that far. But they're our parents. I leveled her with a look. And? That didn't stop them from committing a crime, did it? She swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. I thought you'd let it go. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Of course you did. That's what you've always done. Assumed I'd just roll over and take whatever Mom and Dad did. Well, not this time. Her face crumpled. But it's going to destroy our family. I gave her a long, hard look. No, Sophie. They destroyed our family the moment they decided their greed was more important than their son's future. She wiped at her eyes, breathing heavily. I don't know what to do. That's not my problem, I said simply. Figure it out. She stood there for a moment, as if hoping I would soften, maybe offer some reassurance. But I didn't. I had spent my whole life bending over backward for my family, sacrificing, compromising, letting things slide. Not anymore. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. But the battle was just beginning. After Sophie left, I sat in silence for a long time. I had spent my whole life bending over backward to keep the peace, swallowing my frustrations, ignoring the blatant favoritism. But now, for the first time, I had drawn a line in the sand, and no one in my family could handle it. The calls didn't stop. My parents alternated between desperate pleading and furious rants. One minute they were sobbing, begging me to fix this. The next, they were accusing me of being ungrateful, of destroying our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? They committed fraud in my name. I let their calls go to voicemail. But the worst part? The guilt was still there. Not because I thought I was wrong, because deep down, I knew I wasn't. But because decades of conditioning had trained me to feel responsible for their messes. To be the one who made sacrifices while Sophie got whatever she wanted, no questions asked. I refused to fall into that trap again. Then, a few days later, Sophie called me again. I hesitated before answering. The last time we talked, she had blamed me for everything, refusing to take any responsibility. But something told me to pick up. Her voice was quieter this time. Adam left, she said. I exhaled slowly. What do you mean he left? He called off the wedding, she admitted. He said he needed time to think. That his family doesn't trust mine anymore. That he doesn't trust me anymore. I ran a hand over my face, waiting for the inevitable accusation that this was my fault, that I had ruined her life. But she didn't say it. Instead, she let out a shaky breath. I didn't think it would go this far. I almost laughed. What did you think would happen, Sophie? That I'd just let it go? That I'd let Mom and Dad steal from me and do nothing? She was quiet for a moment. I thought it would blow over. Blow over, like everything else in our family. Mom and Dad had always swept things under the rug, made excuses, and convinced themselves that everything would work out, because it always did. Because I was the one who made it work. Because I never fought back. Until now. You should have told me the truth, I said. You should have stopped them. I know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to lose everything. I let that sink in. And now you have. Her breath hitched. Yeah. A long silence stretched between us. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say to her. You're really going through with the lawsuit? She finally asked. Yeah, I said without hesitation. I have to. Another pause. I don't know what to do. I sighed. That's not my problem, Sophie. For once, she didn't argue. We ended the call without saying goodbye. The next few days were a blur. My attorney had gathered all the evidence, the forged documents, the bank records. The emails confirmed that my parents had knowingly used my identity without consent. It was airtight. Then, I got a call from my cousin Emily. Emily had always been the neutral one in the family, never taking sides in our parents' favoritism. She was one of the few people I actually trusted. You really went through with it? She asked when I picked up. I sighed. Yeah, I didn't have a choice. There was a pause. You know they're freaking out, right? Mom called me crying. Dad won't talk to anyone. They're terrified of what's going to happen. They should have thought of that before they committed fraud. Emily let out a slow breath. They never thought you'd actually fight back. I knew that was true. For years they had counted on my silence, my compliance. They assumed I'd roll over like I always had, but this time they had gone too far. They brought this on themselves, I said. Emily hesitated. I get it, I really do. But what do you want out of this, Ethan? Do you want them punished? Do you want an apology? What's the end game? That question caught me off guard. What was my end game? I wanted justice. I wanted to make sure they never did this again. But deep down, I also wanted something I would never get. Acknowledgement. The truth. For them to admit that they had used me. That they had treated Sophie like a princess while I was just an afterthought. But that wasn't going to happen. I just want them to understand that they can't treat me like this anymore, I finally said. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. They won't, you know. They'll always see you as the problem, the one who split the family. I know, I said, but I don't care anymore. Her voice softened. Good. You deserve better. A few days later, my lawyer called. They want to settle, he said. I blinked. What? Your parents' attorney reached out. They're terrified of taking this to court. They're offering a large financial settlement if you drop the lawsuit. I sat down, gripping the phone tighter. How much? He told me the number. It was big, enough to wipe away my financial worries for years. Enough to fully fund my business without a second thought. But the idea of letting them buy their way out of this made my stomach churn. Do I have to agree? I asked. No, it's your choice. But I'll be honest, taking this to court will be ugly. The settlement lets you walk away with something tangible. If we go all the way, they could end up bankrupt, and you might not see a dime. I swallowed hard. This was my chance to finally be free of them, to take what they had tried to steal from me and turn it into something better. But a part of me still hesitated. They're getting off easy, I muttered. They'll still face consequences, my lawyer said. The bank isn't letting this slide. The fraud investigation is separate from your lawsuit. Either way, they're in trouble. I exhaled slowly. A clean break. That's what this was. A chance to walk away with my life intact, without years of messy court battles. I need to think about it, I said. Take your time, my lawyer replied. I hung up, staring at the settlement offer in front of me. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. For the first time in my life, I had the power. Now, I just had to decide how to use it. I spent the next few days staring at the settlement offer, rereading it over and over, as if the numbers on the page would somehow change. This was my way out, a chance to be free from my parents' manipulation, to move on without years of legal battles. The money was more than enough to fund my business, to secure my future in a way I never imagined. And yet, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like they were buying their way out of consequences. That once again, they were throwing money at a problem, instead of acknowledging the damage they had done. My phone buzzed. Another missed call from my parents. They had stopped yelling and started pleading. Voicemails full of broken voices begging me to reconsider. Not because they were sorry, but because they were afraid. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of what this lawsuit would do to their reputation. Afraid of the consequences they never thought they'd have to face. I ignored the call. Then, a text from Sophie popped up. Sophie, I know you hate me, but please can we talk? I hesitated. A few days ago, she was blaming me for everything. Now she wanted to talk? Against my better judgment, I replied. Me. Fine, but I'm not changing my mind. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. When I walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes she always flaunted, just jeans and a sweatshirt. She had lost weight. She looked normal, vulnerable. I sat down across from her. What do you want, Sophie? She fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. Mom and Dad are falling apart, she said, voice soft. They're selling the house. They might have to move in with Aunt Linda. I stared at her. And? Her lips trembled. And it's all my fault. I leaned back. Oh? I thought it was my fault. She flinched but nodded. I know I blamed you before. I was angry, but you were right. I let them do this. I let them drag you into something I knew was wrong. That caught me off guard. You're admitting it? She looked down. Yeah. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, she sighed. I know you won't drop the lawsuit, and I don't expect you to, but do you really want to bankrupt them? I narrowed my eyes. Do you really think they don't deserve it? She bit her lip. I don't know. Maybe they do, but they're still our parents. I scoffed. No, they're your parents. They never treated me like a son. Her eyes watered, but she didn't argue. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. So what are you asking, Sophie? She hesitated. Take the settlement, walk away. Let them deal with the bank, but don't destroy them completely. I shook my head. That's not my responsibility. They made their choices. I know, she whispered. But do you really want to spend years in court with them? Dragging this out? Watching them suffer? I didn't answer. Because part of me did want that. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be powerless. But another part of me was just tired. I had spent my whole life fighting to be seen, to be respected. Maybe walking away with everything they tried to take from me was enough. I met her gaze. I'll think about it. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights through my window. I called my lawyer. Tell them I'll take the settlement. He sounded relieved. Smart move. I'll handle the paperwork. And just like that, it was over. The next morning, my parents' lawyer sent the final documents. They would pay a lump sum in exchange for dropping the lawsuit. The fraud charges, however, were still in the bank's hands. I signed. Then, I blocked my parents' numbers. For the first time in my life, I owed them nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. The money hit my account. Enough to launch my business, to build something of my own. But the silence was deafening. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the settlement. Not a single word. Then one evening, I got a call from Emily. They're moving, she said. Selling everything. Trying to downsize before the bank takes more. I felt nothing. They're telling everyone you ruined their lives, she added. That you betrayed them. I almost laughed. Of course they are. They're never going to admit they were wrong, Ethan. I know. She hesitated. You okay? I looked around my new office, the one I had built with the money they tried to steal from me. For the first time, I didn't feel like the backup plan, the afterthought, the disposable son. I felt free. I'm better than okay, Emily, I said, and I meant it. The silence after the settlement was almost deafening. No more calls, no more messages, no more screaming voicemails from my mother or guilt-tripping text from my father. Just nothing. For the first time in my life, they had nothing left to take from me. I had won. And yet, I couldn't shake the weight pressing on my chest. I had spent so much time fighting, so much energy proving I wasn't just some disposable son, that now, without them in my life, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I had spent decades being their scapegoat, the one they ignored, dismissed, and exploited. The moment I pushed back, their world collapsed. And now, there was nothing left to fight. I threw myself into my business. For the first time, I had control over my own future. No more financial traps. No more obligations. No more being used as an ATM. The settlement money allowed me to launch without fear. No debt hanging over my head. No instability. No risk of waking up to find my life had been hijacked again. I hired my first employees, leased a small office, and poured every waking hour into making my company a success. And yet, when the nights stretched long, when I wasn't buried in work, my mind wandered. To them. To Sophie. To the wreckage I had left behind. I didn't have to ask. I knew they were struggling. Their house, gone. Their finances, drained. Their reputation, destroyed. They had gone from respected members of their community to social pariahs. The whispers followed them everywhere. The once friendly smiles at church or the grocery store had turned into awkward glances and hushed conversations. They had been exposed. And Sophie, I hadn't heard from her since our last conversation at the cafe. She had tried to stop me, tried to convince me to take the settlement, not just for myself, but to spare our parents from total ruin. In a way, I had listened. I had taken the deal, accepted the money, and walked away. But I also knew she blamed me. Maybe not entirely. Maybe she understood now. But understanding didn't erase what had happened. Her life had crumbled along with theirs. Her perfect world, the one they had built for her, the one they had sacrificed everything for, was gone. And in some twisted way, I was the one who had taken it from her. One night, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A number I hadn't seen in weeks. Sophie. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I answered. "I thought you blocked me," she said quietly. I exhaled. I thought about it. She let out a weak chuckle, but it held no humor. There was silence. Then, finally, she spoke. "They're leaving town," she murmured. "Moving somewhere cheaper." I didn't say anything. I had already heard. She hesitated. "Mom won't stop crying. Dad's furious. They keep saying it's not fair. That you ruined them." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "Of course they do." Another silence stretched between us. Then softly she asked, "Do you feel better now?" I leaned back, rubbing a hand over my face. Did I? I had everything I wanted. Freedom, a fresh start, a life untouched by their selfishness. And yet, "I don't know," I admitted. She sighed. "Yeah, me neither." For the first time she sounded exhausted, not angry, not entitled, just tired. "I miss how things used to be," she murmured. I closed my eyes. "Things were never good, Sophie. You just never saw it." She didn't argue. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she always had, but had been too afraid to admit it. "Where are you going?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." Then, a soft, broken laugh. "I guess I have to figure it out on my own, huh?" I thought about all the years I had spent alone, the years she had been the golden child, oblivious to the damage around her. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. "I guess you do," I said quietly. She let out a shaky breath. "You were right," she admitted. "About them, about everything." I waited, listening. I don't know how to be anything else." The words hit harder than I expected, because that had been me once. For years I had been trapped in the role they had given me, the invisible one, the one who was always second, the one who was only good for what he could provide. And now, Sophie was realizing she had been trapped too. She had been the favorite, yes, but she had also been the dependent. She had never learned how to stand on her own, until now. "Maybe that's a good thing," I said. She didn't respond right away. Then, finally, she whispered, "Maybe." For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't angry. It wasn't tense. It just was. Then at last, she took a deep breath. "Take care, okay?" I swallowed. "You too." And then, for the last time, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at the dark screen. Sophie was gone. My parents were gone. The chapter was closed. I had spent my entire life waiting for them to see me, to acknowledge me, to treat me like I mattered. But I didn't need that anymore. I had built something for myself, something that was mine. I wasn't their afterthought anymore. I wasn't their backup plan. I was free. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Weeks passed. The dust had settled. The legal battles were over, and my parents had finally left town. I didn't ask where they went. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was free. No more guilt, no more expectations, no more being treated like I was nothing. It should have felt good. It did, mostly. But late at night, when the world was quiet, the memories crept in. I thought about my childhood, the moments when I had still hoped they would love me the way they loved Sophie. I thought about the times I had convinced myself that if I just worked harder, if I just gave them what they wanted, maybe they would finally see me. That version of me, the boy who still waited for their approval, was gone now. I wasn't sad about losing them. I was sad that there had never been anything to lose in the first place. A message from the past. One evening, I was at my office, wrapping up the last bit of paperwork for a new investment deal, when my phone buzzed. A text. From Sophie. I thought you should know. Mom and Dad are struggling. They might not be able to afford rent next month. I stared at the message, expression unreadable. Then, another one came through. I'm not asking for money, just letting you know. A few months ago, she would have begged. Guilt tripped me, called me selfish for not helping. Now, just a statement, nothing more. For a long moment, I just sat there, letting the words sink in. And then, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I realized something. I didn't care. Not in the way they wanted me to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even happy that they were suffering. I just felt nothing, and that, more than anything, was the closure I had been looking for. I typed out a response. I hope you figure things out, Sophie. That was it. No advice, no resentment, no final words of revenge or forgiveness, just the truth. I hit send. A few minutes later, she responded. Yeah, me too. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, moving forward. It was over, not in the way I had imagined, not with some grand realization or a moment of satisfaction, or even the kind of ending that tied everything up neatly. Just silence, just a slow understanding that I had finally stepped away from them, for good. I had spent my whole life chasing their love, but love had been right in front of me all along, in my friends, in the people who had supported me, in the life I had built for myself. I didn't need my parents to approve of me. I didn't need Sophie to understand. I had myself, and that was enough. The final goodbye. A week later, I got a final call. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Curious, I answered. Hello? There was silence, then a deep breath. Hey, it's Mom. For a second, I almost hung up, but something in me, curiosity maybe, kept me on the line. I wanted to say... She hesitated. We were wrong. I blinked. She continued. Your father and I, we should have never done what we did. We should have respected you more. I didn't say anything. I know we can't undo it, but... Another breath. I don't want to lose you. There it was. The words I had wanted to hear my entire life. But now they meant nothing, because they weren't coming from a place of love. They were coming from desperation. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry for what it had cost her. I let the silence stretch before speaking. I already lost you a long time ago, Mom. Her breath hitched. I hope you figure things out, I said, echoing the message I had sent Sophie. And then I ended the call. Freedom. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in my life, I felt weightless. I wasn't bound by their expectations anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was me, and I was finally, truly free. I didn't look back. Not this time. Not ever. Story 2. My name is Mary, and I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as an accountant at a small company. Dad worked for a construction firm as a project manager. And then there was Daisy, my sister, 3 years younger than me. You must be a better role model for your sister, Mary, Mom would say virtually daily. You're the oldest. You should know better. I heard that statement so many times growing up that it became like a broken record playing in my brain. Whether it was about keeping my room tidy, earning high marks, or simply basic conduct, the expectations for me were always higher. I recall one specific occasion when I was 16 and Daisy was 13. We were both sitting at the dining room table doing homework. I had my calculus textbook open, working on complicated problems, while Daisy was doodling in her notepad, purportedly working on her English essay. Daisy called out, Mom? I don't feel like doing this essay. It's too difficult. Mom walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Oh dear, it's okay. You're trying your best. Perhaps tomorrow, when you're feeling more motivated, You can work on it." I couldn't help but scoff, remembering how different the response had been when I'd struggled with an assignment the previous week. "Is something humorous, Mary?" Mom's tone had switched totally. "No," I said, attempting to seem indifferent. "Simply fix the issue." "Well, concentrate on your own tasks. You know you need to keep those grades if you want to get into a decent college." That was another painful point from as early as I can recall. I dreamed of going to Princeton. I had put in a lot of effort to maintain a 4.0 GPA, participated in every relevant extracurricular activity I could find, and even started a coding club at my high school because of their renowned computer science program. But when I brought up Princeton during my junior year, my parents shut it down immediately. One night at dinner, Dad said to Mary, "Be realistic. We must set aside funds for Daisy's education since private universities are pricey. She may need more help, you know. With a scholarship, you can enroll in any state institution because of your excellent marks." I sat in my room later that night, looking over my Princeton brochure. I was cross-legged on my bed with college supplies all around me when my best friend Sarah came over. "They shot it down, didn't they?" She sat next to me and asked. "Yeah," I sighed. "I guess I'll have to be practical and save Daisy's college money. But what do you know?" "All right, they want me to go to state. I'll go to state, but I'm going to make it work for me. I'm going to demonstrate my ability to succeed on my own terms." I promised myself as I sat there in my childhood bedroom that I would achieve because of my limits, rather than in spite of them. I had learned one important thing from them. I had to get things for myself if I desired them in life. State University turned out to be just what I needed. I immersed myself into my programming lessons regularly, staying late in the computer lab long after most students had departed. I couldn't get this idea out of my head during my senior year. I had observed that many people had trouble keeping up with their daily routines and tasks. I began creating the structure for Taskmaster, a groundbreaking task management tool that would transform my life one evening while attempting to fit in another late study session. In between sessions, on the weekends, and even on vacations, while other students were off having fun, I worked on the app. I was improving and troubleshooting my code. It turned into my obsession and passion. Once I graduated, I took a big chance. I chose to pitch my app to tech companies, rather than take any of the job offers that were made to me. I was mostly ignored. Some politely declined, but then tech giants showed interest. Sitting in that boardroom with businessmen wearing suits worth more than my whole wardrobe is something I will never forget. Seeing my app being tested. "This is great work," the CEO said, leaning forward. "Amazing." Even though the ensuing talks were fierce, I left with a $5 million check once the dust settled. $5 million. I recall gazing at the figure in my bank account, my hands trembling. I started by purchasing a small yet lovely apartment in a desirable neighborhood. The second was to launch my own business developing mobile applications. The remainder was invested and saved. I wasn't about to blow this opportunity. When I told my family about the agreement, their emotions were fascinating. $5 million. Mom needed to take a seat. Our joyful dad simply kept shaking his head as Daisy glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The dynamic altered almost quickly. All of a sudden, I was more than simply Mary, the older sister with the responsibility. I was Mary the millionaire, and it didn't take long for that to become significant. 2 years after I sold my software, Daisy made her shocking announcement after graduating from college. At Sunday supper, she declared, "I'm getting married," Tom proposed. I was truly delighted for her. Daisy was giddy with anticipation, and Tom appeared to be a pleasant man. I immediately offered to pay $20,000 for the wedding. Mom cleared her throat. "You know, joyful weddings these days are incredibly pricey." Confused, I glanced between them. For a wedding present, $20,000 is a lot of money. Daisy responded, "But it's nothing to you now," adopting the wheedling tone she had mastered since she was a young girl. "It's also the only wedding I have. Do you not want your younger sister to experience the honeymoon of her dreams? We have been examining this stunning Maldivian resort." I sat there feeling the usual burden of their expectations. The problem is that they weren't totally incorrect. I had more money. Daisy's wedding was also taking place, an event of a lifetime. Following considerable deliberation and guilt-tripping, I consented to cover the cost of their honeymoon in the opulent Maldivian resort. Above the wedding present, I was unable to ignore a trend in my family's conduct that began to show after the wedding and honeymoon. Initially concealed under jokes and lighthearted remarks, it became increasingly apparent every week. For Mom's birthday, I got her a high-end purse. She smiled, but then remarked, "Oh, this is good though." In the window of that upscale store downtown, I noticed one that was more attractive. Of course, this one is as beautiful. When I assisted Dad with some auto repairs, which included a $1,000 new gearbox, he didn't get any better. "You know, you're pretty tight with your wallet for someone who makes millions," he observed with a laugh. They could have added an additional $1,000 for new tires, till they intended for these remarks to be humorous, but they still hurt, every time I donated anything. I had the impression that rather than my goals, my money account was being used as a yardstick. She casually commented, "You know, your sister really loved that coffee maker you got her as a housewarming gift," as we were enjoying coffee one Sunday afternoon. She also mentioned that she had seen a fully automatic espresso machine that would have been ideal for their morning routine. Maybe a little too forcefully, I put down my cup. "That coffee machine was $500. Mom." "Yes," but she dismissed it with a sweep of her hand. "When you're as wealthy as you are, what's a few hundred more between sisters?" Speaking of Daisy, she and Tom were still living with our parents after returning from their 3-month honeymoon. This struck me as strange, given that Daisy had begun working as a marketing coordinator and Tom held a respectable position in finance. "Why don't you all search for a place of your own?" One day, when I was assisting Daisy in organizing her messy room, the same room she had had since high school, I questioned her. Surrounded by buying bags from several stores, she collapsed into her bed. "Gee, have you recently looked at rental prices? It's absurd. We would be wasting money." "However, Mary, you both have jobs," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Not everyone can just buy an apartment outright like you did. There are some of us who must be pragmatic." I couldn't help but notice how ironic it was that she called living with our parents practical when surrounded by expensive designer goods. Every family meal now contained suggestions from Mom, including a brief discussion of the housing market. "Did you notice that the little house next to you sold for $500,000? Shaking her head, she would say, "What they're charging these days is illegal. Ordinary folks are no longer able to purchase anything." She would constantly give me important stares while highlighting regular folks. She sent out a deep sigh at one such meal. "You know, things were different when your father and I purchased this home. In fact, young couples could now afford to own homes." She pointed to Tom and Daisy. "In this market, these impoverished children have no chance." One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by my folks' house and used my spare key to gain in. I entered a situation that appeared very solemn. With paper all over the dining room table, Mom, Dad, Daisy, and Tom all gathered together. As soon as they noticed me, they hurried them away. "Oh, Mary," she exclaimed in a somewhat too bright voice. "We didn't expect you today, Mom." Before they vanished into a folder, I caught a glimpse of printouts of mortgage rates and housing listings. "I just wanted to drop by. Is everything all right?" Daisy chirped that everything was all right. But there was something in her voice I couldn't quite pinpoint. I refrained from pushing it. It was their business if they were looking at residences. Perhaps Tom's parents had promised to assist if they had enough money saved for a down payment. In any case, I was just relieved that they were finally making plans to move away. Mom called Mary 2 weeks later. "We must have a crucial family conversation. Would you be able to visit tomorrow night?" Her comments about the refrigerator sprang to mind right away. She had been talking about it all the time. How the food wasn't keeping fresh long enough, how the ice maker was damaged, and how it produced odd noises. It felt strangely formal when I got there the next evening. As if it were an intervention, everyone was seated in the living room. Daisy and Tom are in the armchairs, Mom and Dad are on the couch, and they are all facing the vacant seat that was obviously intended for me. I sat down, and Mary Daisy began. Her tone was solemn. "We have been discussing things as a family." I waited for the refrigerator request while nodding. Tom and I had come to the conclusion that we should get our own house. I responded, truly thrilled. "That's great. It's unquestionably the appropriate choice." Daisy glanced at our parents and then went on. "You're so successful today that you don't know what to do with all the money you have." For impact, she hesitated. We've made up our minds that you ought to purchase a home for us." There was silence in the room. I gazed at her. I was certain I had misheard. "I apologize." "What? It's really logical." Daisy kept going, getting stronger. "You have a space of your own. You paid cash for it. I continue to live with my parents in the interim. It's unfair." I looked around the room, hoping for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke. But everyone's features were dead serious. Gradually, I said, "I don't understand. Why would I buy you a house? Considering that you are my sister." Daisy's voice lifted. "While I am confined here, you have a lovely place of your own. Millions are in your bank account. I need a home of my own. Additionally, I will not squander money on rent. You are able to assist me, so you should—" I took a long breath, trying to be cool. "I'll tell you what I can do. If a down payment is required, I am able to offer a loan with no interest. My lawyer will ensure that we do it correctly. By themselves." Daisy rushed to her feet. "Do you mean me? I'm happily married, and you're alone with your valuable money, therefore you're simply envious." The accusation hit me like a slap. "Jealous? I paid for your honeymoon in the Maldives and gave you $20,000 for your wedding. That money might have paid my living expenses for a year." Daisy hissed. "Oh, here we go. Despite having millions, poor Mary is always counting pennies. You are pitiful." "I earned all of my money," I shot back, my own fury rising. "I started my business from nothing. I live within my means and invest in my business. I have workers who rely on me. Duties. Everyone has obligations, with the exception of your family." Mom said something. A mask of disappointment covered her face. I recalled from my early years. "Mary, I'm embarrassed of you. How come you're so frugal? Stingy?" I gave an astonished laugh. "In the last several months, I've given Daisy more money than most people earn in a year. Your sister must live with her parents while you dwell in your lovely apartment." Dad also said, "What sort of sister do you have?" I surveyed their hostile faces throughout the room. My own family was staring at me as if I were a monster for refusing to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars when they asked for them. Daisy got up and smoothed her expensive gown, which I now realized was a present I had given her for her birthday. "This is how it will operate. You can either buy us a nice house instead of a cheap starter home, or you can leave this family. You have an option." Both parents gave nods of assent. Tom sat quietly, not protesting, but appearing uneasy. I took a look at each one in turn. Mom, Dad, Daisy, Tom. Without saying another word, these folks who had brought me up and grown up with me were now attempting to extort me. I grabbed my handbag and made my way to the door. "Mary," I was called after by Mom. "You have no right to leave through that door." I didn't turn around, but I did halt with my hand on the doorknob. I lost my family as I walked out that door, but I also lost something equally significant while I stayed. My dignity. Their irate words followed me down the driveway as I opened the door. Almost instantly after I left, the bombardment began. My phone was always buzzing with calls and messages from Daisy and Mom. After a restless night, I eventually got around to reading some of them. "You have no right to abandon your family in that manner." Mom read the first message, "Following everything that we have done for you." I lost it at the final section. I returned her call, my voice trembling with rage. "Everything you've done for me." "Like what precisely, Mom?" "You advised me to sort it out on my own when I decided to attend Princeton. You told me I should be self-sufficient while I needed assistance with college. I worked 3 part-time jobs during college, simply to afford a modest apartment with housemates." Mom yelled over the phone. "We raised you. We placed clothing on your back and food on the table. We call that parenthood. It's the bare minimum, Mom. Everything else, my company, my achievement, and my education, I constructed that myself, while you were saving money for Daisy's college fund. I was working so hard to get what I wanted." At Linda's birthday celebration was the next weekend. She had always been friendly to me, so I almost skipped it, but I didn't want to miss it due to family issues. Mom, Dad, and Daisy were already at the restaurant when I got there. I sat down next to Aunt Linda at the far end of the long table, and for a time, everything appeared to be amicable. The toasts followed, and when Linda's friends had completed a heartfelt remembrance of her, Mom abruptly got up, holding a glass of wine. She had a flushed face. She'd had a few glasses already. She declared, "I want to say something about ungrateful kids who lose sight of their origins." There was silence in the room. A look of horror came across Linda's face. "Mary, my daughter," Mom went on. "While her own sister needs a home, her voice would be better off sitting there in her pricey clothing and millions of dollars in the bank. She won't assist her family. She's become a selfish, greedy person who... That's sufficient." Linda and Helen got to their feet. This is not the time or place. Mom wasn't done, though. She owes everything to us. She will no longer even assist her sister in purchasing a respectable house. God. Oh God. Beside me, my cousin Rachel muttered, "Is she being serious?" Daisy's voice was harsh as she jumped in. In order to contemplate contributing with a down payment, she forced me to get a lawyer's contract, her own sister. With a loud scrape of my chair on the floor, I got up. "I paid for your honeymoon and gave you $20,000 for your wedding. You want me to purchase a whole house for you?" With their forks frozen halfway to their lips, the other diners sat in horrified silence. As years of dysfunctional family life unfolded in front of them, Linda firmly stated, "I know Mary's been more than generous at." She contributed to the cost of Sarah's college textbooks and Tommy's diabetes treatment last year. Other family members began to speak up. Sarah brought up the time I covered her emergency dental surgery, and Cousin Mike talked about how I had assisted with his auto repair. Mom's face reddened with every example. She thus lends a hand to everyone but her own sister. Daisy let out a cry. I was at my breaking point. I approached Linda, gave her a firm embrace, and said, "I'm so sorry about all this. Cheers to your birthday." Then I walked away, leaving behind me the sound of voices and arguments. I later discovered that when I departed, the party effectively came to an end, as everyone made hasty excuses to depart. Later, a number of family members contacted to give their support. 2 days after the disastrous birthday celebration, the Facebook notice appeared on my phone. I was tagged in a remark by my cousin Rachel. "You must see this, Mary." I went on to my mother's page and felt my stomach plummet. It was there, a visible statement that everyone might observe with sorrow. Mary, our oldest daughter, is being formally disowned by John and myself. Her lack of gratitude and selfishness have demonstrated to us that money is more important to her than family. We have only one kid, our darling Daisy, as of right now. Numerous responses on the post, primarily from family friends, expressed surprise and perplexity. I was strangely at ease as I sat there looking at my phone. At last, they had completed it, made their manipulation of emotions a show for the public. I blocked them all without thinking. Daisy, Tom, Mom, and Dad. Email addresses, social media accounts, phone numbers, everything. It was similar to cauterizing an injury, painful yet essential. There was heavenly stillness for 2 months. I started treatment, immersed myself into my work, and started to recover. After that, Linda called us. "Your mother has been attempting to contact you, Mary." Her voice was worried as she said, "According to her, it's urgent. She appears to be in a desperate situation." My phone rang with an unfamiliar number before I could reply. Somehow I knew who it was. Mary. Mom's voice was heavy with tears. "Don't hang up, please." I kept silent, waiting. "Everything's coming apart," she continued. "The house is about to be lost. We borrowed money to pay for Daisy's wedding. We used the house as collateral. We are no longer able to make the payments." My grasp tightened on the phone as she proceeded. "Your dad was laid off. We're struggling to make ends meet. Please, Mary. We require assistance. Our only hope is you. Your only hope is me." I said it again. "I assumed you now had just one daughter. Our hand was pushed by you." She lost her temper. "I don't know you at all if you merely assisted your sister," I interrupted. "Mom, that was your decision. I don't let strangers demand money from me." Her voice became unpleasant. "You have no right to refer to your own mother as a stranger. Are you ashamed?" I let out an irritated chuckle. "Disgrace. Because your daughter refused to purchase a home for your other daughter, you publicly rejected her. Money does not cause a mother to reject her kid. A mother does not attempt to control and humiliate her daughter into obedience. You made a decision. Live with it now." Before she could answer, I hung up. My determination is unwavering, yet my hands are trembling. At a Sunday breakfast sans Linda, the truth was revealed. 3 months after the frantic call from Mom, she stirred her coffee and replied, "Your father isn't unemployed. He just shifted to half-time employment because he desired a better work-life balance. Additionally, no bank has threatened to seize their home. To coerce you into giving them money, they made it up." Instead of feeling outraged, I felt strangely comforted. The deception was so plain, so transparent, it somehow made everything clearer. Through the family grapevine, I discovered that Daisy and Tom had finally moved out of our parents' house and into a rental apartment. It seems that they were doing precisely what they should have been doing all along, saving for their own home. At every family get-together, they still bring up you. Over lunch, my cousin Rachel informed me, Daisy never stops talking about her self-centered rich sister's refusal to support her own family. What were the other people's reactions? Rachel chuckled. To be honest, most people these days attempt to avoid inviting them. No one wants to spend the holidays hearing them gripe about you and their challenging life. Something sparked inside of me during that chat with Rachel. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to my family, attempting to gain their favor, while also working as their personal ATM. But their love had come with caveats, price tags, and unending demands. That night, I decided something. I contacted Sophie, my former roommate from college, who was now working as a personal stylist. I require a change. I informed her that I had completely changed. The months that followed flew by. Sophie assisted me in completely revamping my wardrobe, swapping out my functional programmer attire for items that gave me a sense of strength and confidence. I began seeing the upscale cosmetologist who helped me create a glowing skincare regimen. I had my hair chopped, shorter, edgier, more me. However, the alterations were not only outward. I began accepting things I had never tried since I was too busy or too careful. I traveled to Paris when my buddy Jessica offered an impromptu weekend getaway. Mark, a friend of mine who works in coding, asked me to join his rock climbing club. I gave it a go. I joined a women's entrepreneurial network and a reading club, broadening my social circle. I began mentoring young programmers who reminded me of myself at that age, particularly girls. As my business grew, I was surrounded by individuals who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could offer. I got an invitation to my cousin Tommy's wedding a year after my mom's Facebook post. For the first time, I wasn't filled with fear at the notion of my parents and Daisy being there. I came upon a picture from my college graduation last week while looking through some old ones. I could hardly identify the girl in the photo. So anxious to please, so in need of acceptance, yet so scared to advocate for herself. Knowing where she would wind up, successful, powerful, and finally, blissfully free. I considered how she would feel. I framed the picture and placed it on my desk to serve as a reminder of my accomplishments rather than my losses. Walking away isn't always the end. It's only the beginning. You may not always be destined to stay in the family you were born into. Saying no to those who regard your boundaries like recommendations and your love like an ATM may sometimes be the greatest act of self-love. Story 3. My name is Rachel, and I am a 45-year-old dentist who runs a prosperous practice. I made a choice 10 years ago that would permanently alter my life. James, the lovely guy I married, had a daughter from his previous marriage, who was 12 years old. After the wedding, it made sense for them to come in with me because I had a large apartment with many bedrooms. Emma, my stepdaughter, made it perfectly plain from day one that she wasn't thrilled about her father's choice. "Dad," she'd say, right in front of me, "could you tell your wife I'm not hungry?" The way she emphasized your wife felt like a slap in the face, each and every time. It was a battleground for the first few months. Emma would disregard me, smash doors, and have tantrums that would turn heads in the neighborhood. However, I declined to fall for the ruse. Instead of punishing her or fighting back, I chose a different approach. One evening after another one of her rants, I knocked on her door. "Emma," I replied through the door, "I'm not here to take your mother's place. I'm simply hoping we can find our own way to get along." That night, she didn't answer, but after that talk, something shifted. I began to treat her as an adult, rather than as a child who required supervision or discipline. If she chose to talk to her father about something instead of me, I would calmly and logically react to her snarky remarks. That was fine too. One morning, she commented, "Dad, Rachel's pancakes do smell good." She had never before pointed out anything admirable about me. Even if it wasn't stated to my face, things began to change 2 years after the wedding. The adjustment wasn't significant. More like ice slowly dissolving. Emma started talking to me directly. Little requests came first, followed by real talks. In everything I did, I made sure to involve her. Weekend excursions, family getaways, and even goofy movie evenings at home. Rachel. One day, without resentment, she inquired using my name for the first time. "This summer, is it possible for me to join you and Dad at the beach house?" The largest improvement, in my opinion, occurred following Emma's mother Linda's second marriage. Have her own private life to attend to. Linda stopped saying those insignificant things that would make Emma hate me. The phone calls that used to conclude with Emma in tears grew shorter and more informal. One evening, when we were preparing supper together, Emma informed me, "Mom is different now. She seemed to be happier. I suppose everyone is entitled to a second chance at happiness." I gladly took those remarks, which felt like a sacrifice for peace. I became aware that we were at last approaching the status of a true family, as I watched her mix the spaghetti sauce, a recipe we had learned together. I immediately offered to help with Emma's tuition once she was accepted to college. Since James and I had already talked about it, it seemed like the right thing to do. We had gone a long way from the early days of quiet treatments and slammed doors, after all. We sat on her bed the night before daughter departed for college, surrounded by heaps of clothing and partially packed boxes. I needed to tell her something vital. I said, "Listen, Emma, that downtown marketing agency is headed by my brother David. If you're interested, I can assist you find a job there when you graduate. This is an excellent location to begin your career." She gave me a hug, then a really tight one. It wasn't one of our uncomfortable side embraces. "Really? That would be incredible. Rachel, thank you." We didn't get to see her as much as we would have liked when she was in college. She would occasionally spend weekends and vacations at home, but that's typical of college students. I made sure to prepare all of her favorite dishes when she came to visit. She eventually acknowledged that my lasagna was superior to her mother's. When she thought I wasn't looking, she would steal those chocolate chip cookies out of the kitchen. "How is the program for business management going?" Over dinner, I'd inquire. Professor Turner's lesson is still enjoyable. She would become excited while discussing her coursework, internships, and future goals. She had occasionally suggested going to see her mother in the middle of a conversation. "I dropped by Mom's apartment last weekend." Then quickly add, she would remark, "Oh, but I'm working on a project for my marketing class that you should see." When she shifted the topic like that, I never pressed. Why would I? Spending time with her mother came naturally to her. James concurred as well. During these encounters, we had found a comfortable routine. Emma would share information with us about her peers, school, and part-time work at the campus coffee shop. I would prepare her favorite meals, and we would all gather around the dining table like before, laughing and telling stories. "My roommate can't believe how lucky I am to have such a cool stepmom," Emma stated during one of these dinners. She often gripes about hers. She probably had no idea how much those comments meant to me. It was like winning an Olympic gold to hear her call me cool after all those years of hardship. I could tell James was thinking the same thing when he clasped my hand beneath the table. Emma stayed in the kitchen longer than normal one evening as we were cleaning up after supper. She fidgeted with a dish towel and muttered, "Rachel, I appreciate everything. You know everything, not just about college. Time tends to catch you off guard. You're helping your stepdaughter move into her college residence hall one day, and the next you know it, she's getting her diploma while wearing a cap and gown." I kept thinking about the apartment key in my handbag, waiting to transform Emma's life as I watched her cross the stage. My grandma had owned the flat. It wasn't very big. It was a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a good area, but it was ideal for a young professional just starting out. Although I had been renting it out for years, my ideas for it had changed. From the back seat, Emma was talking animatedly about her friend's intentions after graduation. Mike got the job in Boston, and Sarah is heading to Chicago. The fact that people are dispersing around the nation is strange. I grinned as I met James's gaze. She was unaware that she wouldn't need to travel. I was so excited when we arrived home that I was hardly able to control myself. I had the entire apartment professionally cleaned and painted after asking the previous renters to go a month ago. As we sat down in our living room, I added, "Everything was ready, Emma. For you, I have something. I extracted the keys from a tiny silver keychain with her initials, my hands trembling a little. What is this? She questioned, looking perplexed as she took the keys. A flat? My grandmother's old place, I answered simply. Now it's yours. There was utter silence in the room. Emma's gaze shifted from the keys in her hand to me and back again. James's jaw had fallen agape. Are you serious? Emma hardly raised her voice beyond a whisper. Very serious. Now that you are beginning your job, you will require your own space. A family, perhaps. One day. I showed her the photos on my phone. It is located at 542 Cedar Street. You can move in whenever you'd like because everything is prepared. I started crying. Like she used to do when she was younger, she pushed herself against me and put her arms around my neck. This is unbelievable, Rachel. Thank you. Next came James, who drew me into a close hug. I cherish you, in my ear, he murmured. You are aware of how wonderful you are. Emma had already reached for her jacket. Could I go see it now? I made sure she had the address correct and giggled as I gave it to her again. Naturally, the keys are compatible with both the apartment door and the building entry. Explore at your own pace. She said, I think I'll stay there tonight. Is that acceptable? I want to feel at home in my new place. James and I snuggled up on the couch after she departed. Without her busy bustle, the home felt strangely quiet. With my head resting on his shoulder, I whispered, just think. I will meet someone wonderful one day, and they will make that location their first home. James gave my head a kiss. When we become grandparents, you will pamper our grandchildren in the same way that you have spoiled our daughter. Our daughter. My heart grew as I heard those words. She had truly become my daughter in every manner that counted after all these years. All the hardships, the tears, the slowness, and the trust. When my front door exploded open with a noise that made me jump, I was still enjoying my day off and feeling the warmth of yesterday's excitement. Emma's mother, Linda, swept in like a cyclone. You dare. She let out a scream, her face twisted in anger. Who are you, in your opinion? My heart was racing when I got up from the couch. Linda? What's the matter? Don't pretend I'm innocent. I heard about your small present from Emma. A whole apartment, really. The words were almost coming out of her mouth. Do you believe you can purchase my daughter's affection? The charge struck me like a punch to the body. This has nothing to do with it. I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. My grandma left me that flat. Oh, how practical. I was interrupted by Linda, like an animal in a cage, pacing our living area. Knowing full well that I could never match such a costly present, you had no choice but to offer my daughter the extra apartment you happened to have sitting around. Please, Linda, I tried to clarify. I made a conciliatory motion with my hands. Emma is someone I adore. To me, she resembles a daughter. All I wanted to do was assist her in beginning her adult life. Love her. Linda laughed bitterly and harshly. Since day one, you've been attempting to take my position. The expensive trips came first, followed by funding her college education. And now this. She took a step in my direction. I took an automatic step back when she lifted her hand. James suddenly showed there and grabbed Linda's wrist before anything could happen. That's sufficient. He spoke firmly. You must go now. Linda pulled off her arm. Hatred blazed in her eyes. Rachel, this isn't over. You believe you're so generous, so flawless. Well, a mother's love cannot be purchased. Emma will never be your daughter. She will always be mine. Regardless of how many flats you give her, with enough power to rattle the panes, the door slammed behind her. My entire body shook as I stood still. James attempted to entice me into an uncomfortable embrace, but I was unable to unwind into it. My thoughts were racing, repeatedly repeating what Linda had said. All these years, had I really been trying to buy Emma's love? Did everyone think that she is mistaken? James spoke quietly, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. You're aware that she's mistaken. I gave a robotic nod, but on the inside, I felt like everything had begun to fall apart. 10 years of fostering trust, cautious progress, and sporadic reversals, all of which were boiled down to charges of manipulation and bribery. The following morning, Emma appeared as though she had not slept. As I was brewing coffee, she padded into the kitchen, hardly looking into my eyes. Emma, I started yesterday or so. I'd rather not discuss it. Without saying another word, she interrupted me with a flat voice. She disappeared into her former room. As I stood in the kitchen, holding a coffee pot, I heard her door close. In some way, the sound was final, like the fall of a judge's gavel. I could hear her fingers tapping on her phone screen all day long, most likely sending a text. Mom. By the time Emma came out for dinner, I figured the silence had become worse. With her phone still firmly grasped in her left hand, she pushed her food around her plate before abruptly declaring, "Next weekend, I'm hosting a graduation celebration at La Maison." I felt a wave of relief. At last, an opportunity to get over this embarrassment. That's fantastic. I can assist you with all of your planning. We can, but La Maison is costly. No, Emma interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. My real mother is paying for it. The way she emphasized real made my stomach clench. Not just mom or mother, but real mother. Like she was deliberately drawing the line between us. Later that night, I told James about the conversation. The way she said real mother. It seemed like she was trying to hurt me. "You're reading too much into this," he remarked, rubbing my palm absently. "She's just anxious about everything that's happened. You know how Linda can become." But I wasn't reading too much into it. I couldn't be over the following few days. I'd arrive home from work to hear Emma's voice floating down the hallway, enthusiastically contacting friends and family. "The party's going to be spectacular," she'd gush. "Mom's leased out the whole restaurant." Yes, the nice French one downtown. I'd stand in the hallway, key still in hand, listening to her create plan after plan. She made calls to several of our neighbors, her college pals and her relatives. But I didn't receive an invitation day after day. It seemed like another brick was being placed in the wall between us every time I heard her on the phone, or every new person she invited. A wall that I didn't anticipate until it was nearly finished. I heard her speaking in passionate, hushed tones to someone one evening, most likely her mother. Everything is set up. The guest list, the decor, and the cuisine. Something the other person said made her giggle, and the sound twisted like a dagger in my chest. She used to giggle like that with me when we stayed up late cooking or watching movies, after being tortured for 2 days. I made the decision that I could stand it no longer. The following morning, I discovered her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and browsing through her phone as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't been methodically asking everyone to her graduation celebration, except for me, Emma. I didn't want to sound shaky when I spoke. "Can we discuss the party? I have yet to hear any specifics. When should we do this? You won't be coming?" Still without looking up, she interrupted me. "What?" The word was hardly audible above a whisper. She did glance up now, and I could hardly recognize her face. Her lips was contorted in a grin I had never seen before, and her eyes were frigid. "I heard you. You're not welcome." I steadied myself by holding onto the kitchen counter. "What's going on, Emma? Is this a result of the recent events involving your mother?" With a weapon-like emphasis on each syllable, she corrected. "My real mother. She does not want you there, to be sure." "I don't either. I don't get it." I took out a chair and sat down. My legs were weak all of a sudden. "If the flat is at issue." I recoiled at the unpleasant chuckle she gave. "Oh, the flat will remain with me. Who, after all, refuses a free place to live? Think of it as payment. I've endured you and your ideal stepmother for all the years. Take action." It seemed like the room was spinning. "Emma, put up with me. What are you discussing? Have you been in pain for a long time? You truly don't understand, do you, God?" With a shriek on the tile floor, she pushed her chair back and got to her feet. "You were never loved by me. You were the one who ensured my parents would never be able to reconcile. They could have arranged things if you hadn't arrived. We had the chance to be a true family once more." Every statement was like a punch to the body. I reflected on the many late evenings I had spent assisting her with her schoolwork. I'd held her through all the times she sobbed over boys. Every mother-daughter moment I believed we had together. Actual family. My voice broke. "What do you suppose we've become over the last decade? The college fees, all those trips we made together. Yes, splurging. Isn't that your answer to everything?" She scowled, and her face looked so strange with that attitude. Expensive presents, lavish vacations, educational expenses, and now an apartment. Did you believe you could just purchase a daughter for yourself? My intention was not to do that. Tears were beginning to well up, but I blinked them away. I adore you, which is why I did those things, since I believed that we were related. Family. She chuckled once more. That dreadful, derisive chuckle. My mother is my family. My dad is my family. You? You are just the lady who entered the picture and wrecked everything. And now you're attempting to purchase an apartment for my sweetheart. After all those years, I felt like I was out of breath. Did any of it happen? Sunday at 7 o'clock is the party time. Rather of responding, she remarked as she made her way to her room. Don't come. You're not welcome. The wall was covered with pictures of us at her high school graduation, Christmas, and the beach. Moments I cherished but suddenly seemed like intricate lies, and the door banged so forcefully. I couldn't force myself to empty the mug of coffee, even though it had long since gone cold. It seemed as if I were discarding the last decade of my life. I waited for James to get home that night. My hands were trembling as I practiced telling him about Emma's hurtful remarks when he eventually entered the room. Between sobbing, the narrative came out. I had no control. Without removing his coat, he went straight to Emma's room and stated, I'll talk to her. I waited in the kitchen with my hands encircling a chilly cup of coffee. When James eventually came out, the minutes had passed like hours. I eagerly looked up in the hopes of finding assistance and comprehending anything that could ease this nightmare. Rachel. My heart fell before he had even finished speaking because he refused to look into my eyes. Emma makes some good points. Perhaps it would be best if he did not attend the celebration. That's when the world stopped spinning. After 10 years of marriage, everything became crystal clear. All along, I had been living a lie. Are you still going? My voice sounded remote, strange, as if it were someone else's. Naturally, she is my daughter. As if it were the most apparent thing in the world, he said it. As if asking was foolish of me. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. I pretended to be the ideal, forgiving wife for the next few days. At breakfast, I grinned. I prepared their favorite meals. I acted as if nothing was wrong, but every hour my heart broke into tiny fragments. Sunday night. As soon as their car vanished around the corner, I watched them head out to the party. I immediately took action. At my grandmother's apartment, the locksmith was already there. Without questioning why I needed the locks changed so badly, he worked swiftly and effectively. I had new keys within 20 minutes. I moved like a possessed woman when I got home. James's clothing was placed in suitcases according to type and season. It was exactly like how I always packed for trips. By the door, everything was neatly stacked. I was prepared for him to leave my life. I next prepared a cup of chamomile tea, which has been my go-to comfort beverage since I was a kid. I sat down on the couch and opened Instagram, while the kitchen filled with the comforting scent I knew so well. Emma had already shared pictures from the celebration. She was positioned between James and Linda, and they were all grinning at the camera as if nothing were wrong. Blessed to be celebrating with the people who truly matter, the caption said. At midnight, I heard James's key in the door, his footsteps in the corridor, then quiet when he entered the bedroom and saw the baggage. Rachel. His voice was harsh with bewilderment. What's all this? I took another drink of my already chilly tea. You need to locate somewhere else to live. He chuckled, actually laughed like this was all some dumb joke. Don't you think you're overreacting? It was simply a party. Only a gathering? With caution, I placed my cup on the coffee table, the porcelain clinking softly. I was not allowed to attend a family celebration with my husband and stepdaughter. When she said she had never loved me, you stood by her side. You did nothing as you watched her treat me like trash. Now my voice was steady. Sure, divorce papers should arrive this week. He choked back the chuckle. Now give it a minute. This is something we can resolve. What should be fixed? I cut you off. Because you never showed me affection, that I was only your daughter's easy substitute mommy. That you watched as she flung back 10 years of love at me. The front door slammed open before James could react. With wrinkles and mascara running down her cheeks, Emma strode in her party dress. What did you do? She let out a scream. Why am I unable to enter my apartment? I steadied my fingers and took another sip of chamomile tea. Your flat. You mean the flat where my grandma lives? I got it from you. It cannot just be taken back. I can, in fact. I put my cup down. Because you think it was only a bribe to win your affection. I'm retracting it. I'm not a briber. This is not possible. Anger and terror splintered her voice. I did, and I can. In the meanwhile, I gave my brother a call this morning. Don't waste your time applying to his firm for that job. You are no longer a member of the family, I informed him. Emma's face fell flat. It's really harsh. How can you treat me like this? Cruel. Slowly, I got to my feet. Cruel has been feigning love for 10 years. Cruelty is accepting all they provide you while harboring a deep hatred for them. Posting pictures of your real family and keeping them out of your graduation celebration is cruel. At last, James was able to speak. You're being irrational, Rachel. I'm being clear, though. It was the first time in a decade. I looked at both of them. I live in this flat. My family no longer includes you. Now I want you both gone. Emma cried uncontrollably and rushed to her room. She was weeping and swearing as she packed, and I could hear her slamming closet and door doors. I turned up the kitchen faucet to block out James's voice as he continued to attempt to speak. Emma came out with her bags half an hour later. She was angry, and her face was crimson. She spat, "You're a terrible person. You're worse than I imagined. I despise you." Calmly, I said, "Goodbye, Emma. Remember to keep your golf clubs in the garage, James." A last click closed the door behind them as they walked out. For what seemed like the first time in days, I stood in my quiet apartment and took deep breaths. My phone was overflowing with texts the next morning. Before turning to messages, Linda made 17 calls, each one more angry than the last. "You have no right to reclaim the flat, you cunning witch. This is where I'll see you." James's communications were different. They were apologies and pleas. "Talk to me, please. We can resolve this. I apologize for everything." Emma experimented with both methods. I said something I didn't mean. "My life is being ruined by you." "Rachel, please. I apologize." I ignored them and blocked them all. It had finally come to light after 10 years of deceit and deception. They had taken advantage of me for my money, my apartment, and my contacts. Okay, not anymore. The divorce process moved quickly. We are grateful for our prenuptial agreement. James argued about his contributions to the marriage and attempted to take half of my assets. When I showed his lawyer the prenuptial agreement James had signed 10 years prior through mutual acquaintances, his lawyer's face plummeted. They reportedly located a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Emma was having trouble finding a job without my brother's assistance. In order to pay the security deposit, James had to sell his membership at the golf club. Now the apartment feels larger, less full. However, it belongs to me. I brew my chamomile tea every morning and watch the sunrise from the window. No more preparing lavish meals for unappreciative relatives. No more footing the bill for someone else's ideal dinner. More acting.